Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all of you are doing great. This is next part of What If Naruto Repeat Chunin Exam, where Naruto finds he is flung back in time and must repeat the entire Chunin exam over and over and over, until he gets it right and possibly saves Konoha in the bargain. So let's start without any delay. This in an exceptionally large group. If we accept these back, none of our academy graduates will be able to rise to genin this year. Baki grimaced. As he'd suspected, the council had no objections to accepting the legendary medic Tsunade back into the village. These were middle-aged and older men and women. Health had begun to fail in degrees for most of them, due in large part to the rigors of their environment, but also parts just began to grow older and frailer. And those for whom it had not, well, they were aware that it would shortly. Age was a demon no ninja had yet truly defeated. Except perhaps the Kitsune clan. But Baki had yet to be totally convinced of that. For the elderly to accept the presence of arguably the best medic the ninja countries had ever produced, when their own native ones were so pathetic, and these elders knew it, was laughably simply to guess. Of course they would. She'd be giving geriatric treatments within minutes of this meeting. But a strong coalition of several members of the council, led by the head of the Mantis and filled for the most part by similarly bitter men, had mounting obstinate resistance to receiving the rest of the Kitsune clan. Thankfully, no one could prove they weren't deep cover agents. There were not any central records listing all of those working undercover. There could not be. If there was a storehouse, or a vault, or a file with that information on it, that object would be a target of ceaseless attacks, both open assaults and infiltrations, by enemy ninja. To find and crack such a file would be the ultimate espionage triumph, clearing away countless scores of agents the opposing ninja might not otherwise find. No, for such a file to exist would be suicide for a village's spy networks. So what records there were on deep cover agents were fragmentary and encoded. No one person knew them all, their covers and where they were to be found. Else if one person did, that person, be they Clark or Kidge, would be subject to frantic efforts to kidnap and interrogate them, just the same as enemy ninja would have gone after a paper file. So, rather than dangle out the ultimate golden mission fruit tempting other villages to constantly try and best your security, those files were kept well dispersed from each other, with a handful of trusted people managing only a fraction each of the total undercover pie. Even if such a person defected, or was captured, or died without passing control of those agents on, the village still lost only a portion of the network, and it was better to lose a little than to lose all. Baki, fortunately, was one such person, controlling a handful of deep cover agents. So, because of the compartmentalized system of handling them, no one at that table could tell whether or not he was lying about Clan Kitsune being made up of deep cover agents he might or might not have control of. No, they didn't argue about that. Instead they chose to take the political tack and threaten not to accept them based on shinobi caps set by the Windlord. And that was a very hard position to argue them out of. Still, the Jonin leader of the team of the former Kidge's offspring was far from out of options. It required revealing something he was not originally inclined to, but in a set of time loops if it did not go well this time they could try again, using another approach the next. Perhaps you should review their files. Baki began handing out paper forms with select ninja information filled in on each of the Kitsune clan ninja. Note they had been subject to secret experiments while in Konoha, and each is now an active bearer of the precious wood bloodline. No genin we could graduate this year would be the equal of any of these agents' qualifications. Once more Baki had the meeting out of his hand. However, he noticed the head of the Mantis clan start visibly when the files being passed around reached him. Interesting. The man was usually more controlled than that. Bakey was further shocked when the Mantis head, previously his most bitter and stubborn opponent on this issue, reviewed one of those files, then raised his head and said, shocking them all, I withdraw my objections. The coalition who'd resisted their inclusion crumbled after that. I'm surprised that Suna Ninja didn't kill the Wind Lord and make it appear an accident, Ino flippantly remarked. The adult Kunoichi present winced. Kin turned to Taeyar and observed, Konoha's education system really sucks, doesn't it? Probably because they were trying full-time to spike Naruto, and ended up getting the rest of us as well, Ino groused, before heaving a sigh and giving a resigned hand flap. Okay, tell me what I missed. Well, for one thing, you seem to think ninja are the only military force there is, Kin quipped, folding her arms. Well, aren't we? Sakura asked. Then, seeing the old and foreign Kunoichi wince even harder, she tried to remedy that statement. I mean, I know there are hired soldiers, but those are only thugs, right? The approval she was fishing for did not materialize. Tsunade groaned, burying her face in her hands, while Anko got angry. Some of those teachers at the academy are going to die. I swear they will. Again? Hana asked. Again? Anko insisted hotly. Want some help? Yugao offered. Kuinai, who had been painfully rubbing her brows wondering what to say, gave it up and started lecturing, telling them what they'd missed. Okay, I had no idea they skipped this, so I'll just start at the beginning, okay? Okay. She got nods from all the eager young Kunoichi who had formed an amphitheater around her, seated on their bottoms with legs drawn up and their arms wrapped around them. In the first place, government is force, she told them directly and up front. We have an emperor somewhere, but no one cares much about him because he has no ability to enforce his commands. He is a figurehead, with about as much real authority as a carving on a monument, respected, but ultimately powerless. Seeing she had their attention, she asked, so, with that being the case, why do feudal lords rule over countries? Shouldn't it be the strongest person? In which case, why don't the various Kijis rule their countries? The young Kunoichi from Konoha looked at each other, unable to find an answer. Any government that is toothless may as well not exist, the teacher prompted. So how is it they are in change? Where do they get their authority from? I'll give you a hint, it's not ninja. Kankuro stretched. We are a mercenary force that will apply our strength to any country. We don't bother enforcing a daimyo's authority at home. So who does? They'd have to have some kind of soldiers do it. Naruto appeared with a smokeless poof, proving he'd been listening all along. But that doesn't make sense. Those soldiers we fought at Wave were nothing. The least ninja could kill them in droves. That's correct, Naruto Kuinai nodded, smiling fondly on the blonde. They do have soldiers, but they aren't the sort of gutter trash you fought at Wave. Samurai Iam spoke shortly. That's right. Kuinai nodded. The daimyo of each country sits at the head of his own fighting force, composed of aristocratic samurai, who rule the lands in his name, and fight for him when he calls for aid. There are about as many samurai in each country as ninja, and that is deliberate. Except in Wind, where the samurai are about triple, our ninja forces having been reduced, Kankuro observed coldly. Kuinai raised a palm to forestall questions. And before any of you ask, no. They are not any sort of cut-rate troops. In addition to administering the provinces of each country, large and small, and serving as the bureaucracy of sorts, each samurai is also a warrior, spending hours each day in honing their bodies and their minds, and those of you who recall your lessons on chakra know what that ought to do. It would expand their chakra capacity and control, Hinata answered. But what do they use it for? Chakra weapons and armor, Taiyar interrupted bluntly. I'm not familiar with that. Naruto shook his head, leading most of the younger girls with him. This got Anko even more steamed, and she started muttering about doing terrible things to those academy instructors. Kuinai was silently vowing to help. Chakra armor creates a barrier, a field if you will, around the wearer that utterly negates any foreign chakra that enters. It also provides strong protection against blows. In practical terms, that makes them immune to illusions, elemental powers, and most other ninja techniques. They can afford to simply ignore them. A ball of fire would stop and fizzle just short of them, lighting vanish into the air rather than touch them. Even walls of earth raised by chakra crumble at their approach. Why don't we use that stuff? Ino broke in quickly. Because it diverts the wearer's chakra to do its shit, Soon answered. You could put on a set, assuming you could obtain one, but you couldn't use any of the powers it would stop, no illusions, elemental abilities, or most ninja techniques. Any chakra you manifest outside your own body it would take and use for itself, powering that shield that protects you. That would still leave you with armed and unarmed combat techniques, Hinata observed. And guess what those samurai train exclusively in? Yugao asked. They have no need for our flashy ninja tricks, so they spend all their time focused on those things that can work for them, armed and unarmed styles. And their weapons. She shook her head in remorse. Chakra swords can operate within and even penetrate the chakra shields created by the chakra armor. It's a contest of both wills and skill, Kuinai told them. But their chakra blades will carve through anything less, Yugao added. And, just like it is illegal for anyone but ninja to use ninja skills, owning any of the special equipment that makes samurai what they are is also prohibited to anyone but samurai. There are rumors that Snow Country, I think, has a daimyo lacks enough to not care about that standard, and that he's let some ninja from his village there obtain and practice experimenting on samurai equipment. I hear they are trying to modify it so it does not prohibit use of ninja skills, but actually enhances them. Taiyar offered with a shrug. For what it's worth. I've heard that rumor too. Yugao nodded. But if that's so, the daimyo there must be singularly stupid. That's the one advantage samurai have over us ninja, and letting us play around with their gear could lead to a situation where shinobi could overthrow samurai rule. Be that as it may, Kuinai diverted this conversation so it was back on track. Mature samurai are profoundly skilled at armed and unarmed combat, immune to most if not all of our special ninja techniques, have powerful chakra and, she sighed, their own techniques for using it. While I said that all external chakra manifested gets absorbed, and that is true, samurai are adept at many internal uses for chakra, chiefly enhancing their bodies so they can run faster, strike more quickly, become stronger, and otherwise perform beyond the normal human limits of their bodies. Samurai rule because they are powerful. Hana informed them, folding her arms as she leaned back against a wall. In far gone days we shinobi could sneak in and assassinate them while they were asleep or otherwise at rest and not wearing their armor. But then they invented chakra fortresses, and those days are past. The castles they live in now have the same properties as their armor, absorbing all external chakra manifested in or near them to fuel a shield that protects them from harm. Internal chakra and samurai gear excepted, of course. So they have all their toys to defend themselves with at home, but ours get shut down if we go visiting. We can run fast and strike fast, but samurai can run and strike faster. For most of us the internal arts are a sideline, if we know them at all. But for a samurai, they are their entire focus. So on average they are much better at them than we are. Shitsune interjected. Guy and Lee might be an exception, Hana smirked. Don't count on it. Tsunade observed coldly. Ninja are taught to use their chakra a certain way, and that bleeds over despite our intentions. Even my strength gets shut down inside those palaces. All sorts of stuff you'd think is internal isn't, because of the way ninja get taught to use their energies. Virtually all our training is on pushing chakra out of our bodies. Still, it seems there ought to be some way we could kill them, Ino mused. HMPH, if we need to kill a samurai, we have to find him away from home, preferably alone, and exhaust him. Tamrai grunted, seating herself on a bench with more force than necessary. Looking at the rest, she said, the armor they use isn't free. They do have to feed chakra to it to keep those shields up. It's like any technique in that. Why else do you think they spend so much time enhancing their chakra reserves? They do need the energy. So, couldn't we lay siege, or something? Naruto offered the idea. Anko shook her head, arms also folded as she leaned across from Hana. If it were just the samurai, maybe. But there are actually 3 separate military forces in each country completely independent of each other, but ultimately all of them report to the daimyo. Ninja and now samurai you know of Kyoin, I explained. The last are the monks. Monks. Several young voices echoed together. Yugao was nodding. There are several monasteries in each country. Before you ask, we've tried infiltrating them several times, and no, it doesn't work. They are better than the Yamanaka about detecting moles or sleeper agents. Also, they've got some way of enforcing binding oaths on their members. Why the secrecy? Hinata blinked curiously. Because the way they control the elements makes what we ninja do look sick. Anko declared, dropping her arms to stand tall. They don't use hand seals, nor do they rely on specific techniques. A monk who has studied fire can control that like Gaara does his sand. The country of fire is not actually named for anything to do with Konoha, Shitsune softly declared. But for the excellent quality of the fire monks who study there. The country of lightning, the same, Hana sighed over her folded arms. Ninja do not revolt against their lords because those lords could call down monks out of the monasteries, as well as their own samurai against us, and we could not survive. We'd be forced to flee, again. Does anyone know how those monks do their screening? Hinata asked. No. Only that it seems perfect, Yugao replied. And before you talk about Kyuubi, or any of the tailed beasts, there are more forces at work in this world than just demons. Some monasteries are rumored to control dragons. Feudal lords are lords because of the balance of militaries they control. Anko summed up. If any one of the 3 forces get out of line, they can use the other 2 to correct that. The monks are just as much into armed and unarmed combat and internal body enhancement training as the samurai, so can pose a threat to them even in their homes. But of the 3, it is the samurai who are toughest to beat, Yugao agreed. And that is why they are in charge. Clan Kitsune was on vacation. That meant many things, but mostly it meant mental stimulation, going out and finding new things without laying down requirements for doing anything right this time. That was the only way they had to relax anymore, and they were determined to enjoy it. Besides, so far it had been fun. Part of what that meant of course was to go out and discover stuff, and since not everyone held the same interests in the same priority, occasionally that meant going off on your own. They actually did a fair bit of that, as stuff you discovered while you were out by yourself could be discussed with those who hadn't seen it and lead to all new conversations, another form of all too rare treat for them. So Tenton was off to look into some of those smithies she'd been hearing about, when she ran into a large man in green armor blocking her path. "You have returned," the man told her in sober tones. Tenton was confused, not sensing any hostility or threat from the man. Then she recalled the cover story they were using. They were all supposed to be deep cover agents who'd been uncovered and retrieved. So she shot him a smile. "Yup. Bakey ought to have told the council by now, right?" The man cocked his head at her. "You do not remember me?" Now Tenton was stumped, staring at him in confusion. "No, sorry. I haven't any idea what you're talking about." The man casually unfolded his arms and waved a one-handed seal before her face. "Remember? So, if we're supposed to be deep cover agents, won't we stand out? I mean, part of the reason we are here is that most of us know nothing about this town. That ought to trip us up right away. Wouldn't it?" Kuinai smiled fondly at Hinata's objections, and ruffled the girl's hair. "No, not actually." "But why?" Ino asked. The same question had been troubling her. This time it was Anko who smirked and took over the conversation. "Because there are two great dangers to undercover assignments. The first great one is the one everyone fears, being uncovered as a foreign agent. But we go to such extreme lengths to avoid that, layering our agents in false personalities and getting them to delve deeply into their roles to avoid the guys searching for agents like them, that we actually create the second big one, forgetting who you really are, who you work for, and what your job actually is." Yugao nodded. "That's right. People live for a fairly long time, but we have to replace field agents almost constantly. Do you know why? It's because most of those who don't get caught submerge their true loyalties so deeply they forget their original roles and lives. You can't get information out of such a person, so they have to be replaced. It's called going native, and it happens to most agents who don't get caught early on." Anko sighed, shaking her head sadly. "A human mind is not built to deceive itself for long. Any cover deep enough to get you clear of counter-intel types will slowly overcome the reality you are trying to hide, until the lie is your reality. The number of people who can sustain them both and balance the razor's edge between what they present to others as real, and what truly is real, is surprisingly few, and may itself be a mental disorder," Shitsune admitted. "So even successful spies have to be replaced all the time," Anko admitted. Shitsune was pondering. "The problem could be avoided if we could withdraw our agents from their cover assignments regularly to reinforce the original's personality, skills and goals. But that would take at least a month out of every year, and you can tell that every ninja village's counterintelligence people would be looking for those patterns." After that, the first apprentice to the legendary medic shrugged. "Some of the sleeper or deep cover agents who go native could be helped and their memories restored if they could be reached. But that is the hard part." Anko leaned back and crossed her arms behind her head, chewing on a dango stick. "Also, you can imagine the nightmare of trying to convince a person to go back to a life she doesn't want, just as you've finished correcting all the damage it did her psyche." "It would be cruel," Shitsune agreed. "Heartless, more like." Hannah snorted. Yugao sighed and looked out across the skyline. "Intelligence is one of those fields that takes a regular flow of people and chews them up into wasted shells, either caught and destroyed or lost to their delusions forever. But the villagers keep doing it, because we have to. Konoha doesn't do much of it compared to most others, and I can't say I mind that policy. But I also believe I've mentioned that we replace the costs of running a successful intelligence network with the equally terrible costs of getting blindsided by events. And if anyone knew of a way to fix it, we wouldn't have this problem. Ino summarized, jumping ahead of her teachers to say it. Sadly, this is so Chunin. I agreed. Hi guys. The group looked up as Tenten rejoined them. She seemed rather subdued as she turned a pale face on them in the courtyard of the Sabaku home they'd been using for this discussion. Is something the matter? Hinata scooted close, and, sensing the other girl needed comfort, hugged her. Tenten nodded, then started sobbing. Yeah. There is. It turns out my name is not Tenten. I am actually Orange Blossom of the Mantis. I'm a clan heiress just like Hinata-chan here. Tears were streaming down her cheeks as she admitted, I have a mother. And a father. I even have siblings. A couple of younger brothers and sisters who were raised hearing stories about me. I got my name from my mother's favorite flower, a tree that grows in our clan's backyard, kept alive for her at great expense because my father loves her so much. They just took me to look at it. The girl collapsed in Hinata's arms and began sobbing. That bombshell just kind of took everyone by surprise. Ino rushed forward to perform a mind-body switch, checking out the other girl's mind. When she emerged, she shook herself, and gazed at her sobbing friend kindly. But it can't be. We checked, right? Yugao asked, seeing Hinata was too busy comforting the other girl to mention it. Ino drew in a deep breath and released it slowly, on the verge of sympathetic tears herself. Quickly, she shook her head. Not well enough, as it turns out. I would have caught anything she was conscious of, but Tenten had forgotten it all herself, and it was so deeply buried in the background clutter that I never noticed. Poor girl. A deep cover agent who got lost. Kin wondered aloud, looking to the adults. Yugao tensed, but Anko subtly waved her down, shaking her head. Seeing the Anbu sword mistress still holding herself ready, the special Jonin scooted over to grab her and whisper in her ear. Now you just think a minute. Here we have a girl who's been with us for years admitting to us she had a past she never knew of. That's not the action of someone more loyal to another than to us. Poor girl is just as shocked by the revelation as we are, and is more concerned we'll reject her based on this than we are she'll betray us. On Yugao's other side, Tsunade nodded soberly, even as Shitsune added herself to the group hug around Tenten. And what could she do? We are in a set of time loops. All of us are constrained by the fact that none of us can form, or maintain, meaningful relationships with people who aren't aware that time keeps getting reset around us. Besides, Anko murmured softly to avoid her voice carrying over to any of the kids. Ino was just inside her head, and I can assure you I trained that little brat better than to not check for illusions or compulsions or junk like that after a revelation like this. Ino gave no warning, so she's clean. None of her love for Naruto, or for us, is feigned. Hana added to this covert little huddled discussion among the adults, scratching her nose to subtly indicate that extremely keen sense of hers. All her loyalty is still to us. She's just afraid she'll lose us, that we'll reject her. Which we have no reason to, Tsunade insisted, acting as she rarely did as the chief among Naruto's wives. We're not going to. Naruto appeared behind them to add his own hot insistence to this affair. The appearance of Naruto served as a catalyst. Once reassured that he still loved her just as much as he ever did, the dam burst and Tenten, or Orange Blossom if you prefer, wanted to tell them all about the life she'd forgotten. Sharing was part of healing, and once reassured of their love for her and the relationships they had with her staying intact, she did so with gusto. "Would you believe I was a prodigy?" the girl asked them, clearing some of the tears out of her eyes and starting to smile. "I graduated the Suna Ninja Academy at the age of 5, and was an acknowledged wind mistress and Chunin at 6. My family were so proud of me. I'd mastered all of our clan techniques by then, and carried a fan my mother made for me. It's lovely. I wish I could show it to you, but my clone is still getting reintroduced to them, and it's with them. I could show you later. But anyway, my dad objected to one of the Kazaki's policies, killing Gara actually, and he thought to humble us by sentencing me to deep cover." Tenten, still wiping tears out of her eyes, fighting urges to laugh or chuckle or cry some more, she didn't know what, took a deep breath and plunged on. "They sent me to Hidden Rock first, but I got found out. Dad was able to extract me anyway, and after the Kazekage refused to let me back I got reassigned to Konoha. One anonymous orphanage fire later, and a whole load of Kyuubi orphans got reassigned to other orphanages while the first one got rebuilt, and I was just included among them." Hinata was nodding. "I can see how that could be effective. Most of the records would have been lost, and with the children dispersed they wouldn't all recognize each other." Tenten was nodding. "And I was so determined not to get caught this time that I submerged all of my skills so deeply I forgot I even had them. Then I went and forgot my family, and..." Seeing the girl was threatening to break down into sobs again, Naruto picked her up and shouted gladly. "Hey! This means I finally get in-laws out of you. Come on everybody. Let's go meet them. Hooray!" The group cheered. His enthusiasm was catching. "You have 2 families now," Hinata reassured the girl. "Not unusual when a girl gets married," Anko allowed, deliberately casual. "I hope I can like them as much as we love you," Kin added her support. Tenten was beaming at all this acceptance. "Just remember," Tsunade reassured Yugao as the 2 followed along, trailing just a touch behind the rest of the group and speaking softly. "What the usual situation would be here is a confused former agent having to decide who she is more loyal to, in other words which relationship matters the most to her, and we are in a set of time loops. Remember what that does?" And Yugao did, and it reassured her tremendously. Her budding relationship with a boy outside the loops could not survive her progressing as a ninja and a person while he did not. In a choice between a relationship that grew and flourished and which was already well established, versus a tentative and new one that could not change or grow, Tenten would inevitably select the growing one. Therefore, she was safe, and could be trusted. On reaching that conclusion, the Anbu's fears relaxed concerning her. "First, I would like to blow a raspberry to Hawk's fanfiction forum. For, if they'd had their way, this story never would have completed its first chapter. And they continue to sneer at it to this day. I ask only that someday the universe return that karma to their own heads." Naruto stood grinning out in the desert. A clone popped. That was the signal. 1,000 Narutos arranged in a huge circle all cried out together, "Rose Rampart!" A huge wall began to rise between the clones from their circle, curling inward to rise as a dome. However, the wall cracked as it was rising, dropping huge, multi-ton blocks of stone while collapsing in on itself. Splashing rubble popped many of the clones that had been forming it. As dust plumed skyward, the real Naruto, who was up on a ridge watching the whole affair, sighed and palmed his forehead. Third failure so far. A nearby clone bearing a clipboard and with a pencil shoved behind his ear remarked unnecessarily. Then, just to keep talking as it knew the original already had this information. It said, "Sand keeps shifting under the base. Apparently the new supports you designed aren't going to compensate enough." The real Naruto sighed, nodding. But talking to himself did help to review the data and get new ideas, which was why he still did it. Suddenly galvanized, he shot straight up and ordered, "Send down clones as deep as they can dive on underground move jutsu. See how deep this sand goes. If we can't build on sand, we may have to use bedrock for our foundation." "Right." The clone formed a hand seal and another 2,000 Narutos went about clearing away rubble and following those newest orders. The clone with the clipboard starting doing calculations with his pencil. "As big as this will be, we still won't be able to keep most of the dome from being underground. This sand is like water. No matter how deep a hole we dig, it will just fill it up again. What with the way wind blows in this country, the sands shift constantly, and according to our first reports, it is almost as deep as we'd planned for this dome to be tall. It would take major engineering to make it any taller, and then it would have to hold up not only its own weight, but all of the sand pressed up against it. Well, the point of this whole experiment was to see if we could build a dome out of polarized rock over sooner to cut down incoming sunlight," the real boy proclaimed. "Being partly underground might just help us do that. Clear a hole. Let's give this new plan a try." "Yes, sir," the clone replied. "Shovels." The real Naruto scowled. "All right. Let's go seek out Tamrai and see if she can't teach us those street sweeping exercises she's got. You're right, there's no practical way to clear off enough bedrock to work on otherwise." "You want what?" Tsunade repeated dumbly. Naruto's other wives would be giggling madly. It wasn't often, especially in these resets, where you could catch the legendary slug Chunin by surprise, if they weren't all staring dumbly themselves. "It would be our honor," the Sand Council man repeated, standing at the head of the entire Suna Ninja Council, "to receive you as our Kazekage." Seeing her continue to stare at him blankly, he stumbled, "That is, if you will accept the post." Once more he offered her the conical hat with the symbol for wind on it. Beiki coughed into his fist. "As the most powerful shinobi currently active in the ranks of Hidden Sand, due to your recent return from your deep cover post, you are of course first choice for the position. And it was you and your undercover team who discovered our last Kazekage was assassinated," a third councilman stated. "We feel it only right that you, arguably the person most suited to defending the position of Kazekage from another attempt by your old teammate to infiltrate it, should have the job. What's the salary of this position?" Shitsune shoved forward to ask. Dark clouds hung around her teacher as she did so. The Chunin had long since come to accept the more or less permanent freedom from her debts as one of the best parts of these resets. But apparently her apprentice still kept them in mind. "Well, Sand is not a rich village," the chief councilman hedged. "But perhaps you would find secrets from the village's jutsu library some compensation." "She accepts." Naruto appeared to shout in unison with all his angels. "Good." Beiki and the Sand Council beamed as Naruto put the hat on his wife's unresisting, but still unhappy head. "As my first order," the Chunin growled, grabbing Naruto by the throat. "I appoint Naruto here chief geriatric practitioner of Hidden Sand." There came much giggling from the wives as Naruto blanched. "And the rest of these girls his subordinates," Tsunade finished coldly. "I've trained them all very well. So bring out all your old people. They're going to give them checkups, right now." The cries of anguished souls rang out. That was cruel and unusual punishment, Tumrai groaned, burying her face in the water they'd brought along for a personal hot spring. WW wrinkled, "B bodies." Naruto shivered. Nor was he alone in his grimacing and shivering. The entire clan had been hip-deep in ugly old people all afternoon. It was not a happy sight. "So I was fascinated by that case you had with the osteoporosis patient who took well to the treatments," Ino told Shitsune brightly. The Sanin's first apprentice smiled. "Yes, degenerative conditions like that one are the hardest to heal, and you see them all the time in the elderly. I wish it were as simply to fix as a kunai injury, but sometimes all you can do is heal the breaks and smooth over past damage and hope that gives it enough strength not to break as easily the next time. You can't just strengthen or replace the bones." Taeyao asked, curious. "Good heavens, no." Shitsune chuckled throatily. "Do you know how much I would give to be able to do that for patients? We can patch them together with medical chakra, but you can't draw on resources that don't exist. Cells replace and divide naturally, so it isn't all that hard to encourage them to grow, but if their bones are failing they often don't have the necessary bits to rebuild them. The body sees the bones as its emergency calcium storage and takes some out when it needs to, but putting it back in is the hard part. As you grow older it gets harder to absorb nutrients like that, so they just aren't floating around in the bloodstream to add back in, even if you could. So it's just part of growing old, your bones and body get frailer." Taeyao wondered. "I know a guy in Sound who can grow his bones out and use them as armor or weapons. Are you telling me it's not a technique?" "Has to be a bloodline," Shitsune told her. "Those break all sorts of rules. But as far as medical techniques go, that's out. It's not even an option." Finished scrubbing up, the red-haired Chunin from Sound got up and headed to the pool for a soak. "Well, I think I've found my medical project then. I'll make it a point to study that guy. Perhaps I can learn something. It would do a lot to aid the elderly." Shitsune joined her. "All sorts of things wear out, skin, organs, and so on, but bones are one of the most crucial. You could always keep muscles fit if you weren't concerned about breaking your bones doing it. Well, there's also heart failure and things, but we can restart those." Shitsune mused, then shrugged happily. "No, if there was a way to solve the bone problem, countless older shinobi would not be so helpless. It's something to look into." Then Taeyao pulled out her flute and played a few notes, creating a chakra puppet that began to rub her down. Where her old ones were all deformed and demonic looking, hoping to inspire terror, or at least some revulsion, in combat, lately she had taken to experimenting. This one was tall, blue-skinned, and looked like a female genie, much more comfortable to have around, and somehow appropriate as a servant in the relaxed and sumptuous setting of their baths. "So, you make it sound like ninja don't have any advantages at all." Tenten observed to Kuinai among the younger wives as they were all washing up after a marathon medical session she was trying hard not to remember, giving checkups and examinations to every grey hair in Sand, interrupting the talk about bones that kept reminding her of it. "Dealing with samurai, I mean." "Not at all." Hana quipped on her behalf, also sudsing up. "Ninja are tricksy. Pushing chakra out of our bodies allows us to do things no samurai or monk could attempt. None of them could walk on walls, and only water monks could walk on water. Only ninja can disguise ourselves or vanish in a puff of smoke to reappear elsewhere, and no samurai or monk can make clones or control puppets. Illusions are also our specialty, and while those don't fool armored samurai they can be used to deceive monks, who, being unarmored, can also be taken down by a handful of thrown senbon or kunai if done correctly. Eager for the subject change, Anko and Kyuinai also joined in, with the former teacher taking the lead. We also make heavy use of storage scrolls, when neither other branch does. Monks are actually quite good at seals, but don't go anywhere and have taken vows of poverty, so moving lots of things about is not one of their priorities. And while samurai might be interested, they are too busy with other things. You can't be good at everything, and they have administrative duties to consider. So you won't find many among them who have any skill at seals. They rely on monks and ninja for that. As Kyuinai rinsed off, she tossed an "Are you paying attention?" glare to the young girls. As a consequence, neither of the other militaries are as adept at summons as we are. They have a few, but not many. Samurai are too ignorant of the sealing art, and monks don't get enough practice with the small stuff or expressed chakra, so must do it in groups if they do it at all. Anko was grinning privately now as she shampooed her hair. Also, we have a permit or license, so to speak, to behave in ways others find dishonorable, like in the use of poisons. We find nothing wrong with that, but neither other military would use any. The same goes for traps. Tricking a samurai to rush after you, break through a thin ground cover and fall into a deep pit you then collapse on him is one of the best ways of dealing with them, but they think that sort of stuff is terribly unfair. Just like making them chase puppets or clones across the countryside. Kin joined this conversation long enough to snigger. A simple clone, whether an illusionary one or made out of some material, is its own chakra construct anchored to itself. So it can't be dispelled the way a hell viewing technique could, and it is one of the few illusions a samurai's chakra armor doesn't protect them from. Not until they touch and dispel it, anyway. One of the reasons it gets taught to everyone as a basic technique, Anko agreed. The basic three are all like that. Transformation anchors its illusion to your chakra, not the samurai's. So again they aren't protected unless they actually touch you. And they can't kill you if they can't find you, which annoys them to no end. She smiled, then waved a soapy finger at the younger Kunoichi. No one is as flexible as a ninja, except another ninja. We acknowledge no rules governing our behavior except a cavalier whatever works attitude and loyalty to our village. Unlike monks, we'll often use techniques from whatever elements we can get our hands on, and no one else uses any stealth, even if I must admit we've gotten fairly lax in that ourselves lately. But the next time a real war crops up, you'd better believe we'll pick that up again in short order and once again be the ghosts of the battlefield. Also, during real war samurai must be campaigning in the field, which means they don't all get to sleep in those wonderful chakra-stealing stone castles of theirs, which puts us back in the business of killing them in their sleep. Hannah agreed, sinking down into the tub with the rest of the women already there. Ninja are the go anywhere, do anything force. Both of the others are too uptight to do anything about, say, a rice shortage or stolen necklace. The samurai will tell a merchant to solve the rice problem, and monks don't care about anything outside their own monastery walls. Monks care mostly about the heavens and things not of this world, while samurai govern the day-to-day living. That leaves us with everything else, all the in-between stuff. Like pushing ships, Tamrai added, relaxing into the soak and glad for the subject change from the earlier medical one. Samurai can't, and monks do not care about money and wouldn't want to cheapen themselves to such a mercenary role anyway. They want to be left alone to deal with heavenly things, not be shackled to a boat to run cargo. Kyuinai was nodding. One of our strengths as ninja is our willingness to do practically anything. No monk would cheapen himself to become a glorified mule pushing ships about to ferry people back and forth on a lord's beck and call. Just as no samurai would permit himself to be harnessed like an ox to plow fields. He may be that strong, but he'd rather starve. Monks and samurai do not hire themselves out to perform missions. Ninja do. Hana agreed. Often we are the only recourse of the common folk who want something done they are unable to do themselves. And not just for the common folk, our traveling 10, the camping techniques you all know. Well, samurai hire us as camp followers during war just to keep their armies more mobile and flexible by lighting all their campfires for them, washing all their pots, and recharging batteries for any tech they use. Not glamorous Kunai joined them in the soak, but the best place to put newly minted genin who don't know anything better and are still too raw to risk in combat. I was glad to do it in the last real war. They were graduating us so fast we were still too young to have any real muscles. Better to wash dishes and live than face someone 4 times your strength, size and speed, and who has 10 times your experience, and die. You grew up into an illusion mistress because you later had to fight and had not developed the muscles, right? Hinata asked softly, and Kunai nodded. Another reason destructive jutsu are popular, Anko added. In most wars we don't have to fight samurai, they'll take care of themselves. Samurai are all too eager to slaughter enemy samurai in the great big wars of theirs. Our job is to handle the enemy ninja that might want to poison a samurai army's food supplies, blow up a bridge they may be crossing, or slip a pretty kunoichi between a commander's sheets to stab him during a romantic moment, or, worse still, stay with him smiling sweetly while every night copying all of his organization and planning documents to send to her own side. Scouting is an essential function in all combat. Hana sighed, stretching as she enjoyed the hot pool. If you don't scout, you don't learn the terrain or the enemy's strength and disposition. In short, you lose. And you can scout in 2 general ways: send out a lot of ninja to hopefully slip past the enemy ninja on guard to see the enemy camp and count his numbers, or use spies to copy that information out of their own tables of organization. A kunoichi in a commander's bed is one of the most successful scouts ever invented. But coming back to the force comparisons in event of a conflict, Teiya lectured, coming into this conversation herself. Other advantages of ninja are, due to our summoning expertise, we own and use more technology than either other force does. We carefully cultivate our special bloodlines, which the celibate monks can't, and samurai are too noble to marry a peasant girl just because she can manifest ice. Also, none of the others are as good at medicine, because that requires expressed chakra and they don't have our skill in that, although some monks do try, and a couple get almost as good. Anko was grinning as she tilted back a cup. Also, one of our trademarks is to vanish before a deadly blow only to get replaced by a block of wood, which they hate, and neither of the other forces do. She smirked nastily. They always get so angry when we do it, fighting them, like we are cheating them out of their just rewards right when they've earned a kill on us. That might even be true by their standards, but we are ninja, whatever works, we'll do. Tamrai groaned as Teiya's genie masseurs went to work on her. Not as good as Naruto, but then nothing was. And the special defenses of hidden sand do apply. They cannot see through sandstorms, like we do. Nor can they prevent the grit from touching them, again as we do. Monks and samurai don't get our sunblock or sunstride techniques, so get to bake out their slogging through hip-deep dunes. Also, indirect damage from ninjutsu can still happen. So wind jutsu can make a sandstorm, blowing up dust and grit that destroys samurai, choking and burying them. Suna is actually the village best defended against their own government, which just may be a factor in why our daimyo doesn't trust us at all. She looked up to see their faces. Doesn't help us a bit if we get declared in rebellion and the wind monks get called down against us, but it does cut down on official inspections. Hana gave a throaty chuckle. And, of course, everyone has always relied on us as spies. Even Konoha, who takes last place in the intelligence contests between major villages, gives their daimyo regular reports, and he doesn't know those reports aren't top rate. Anko chuckled throatily, leaning back and at rest. Not even the top villages give their best information to their daimyos. Stupid nobles have the worst senses of what to blurt out in public gatherings. A careless comment meant as a show of "look what I could do to you if I wanted to cow another lord into submission" has often led to the deaths of entire intelligence cells. So the ones with the really good intel don't share it, especially not with their lords. So it's not like the Fire Lord knows he is missing anything. His competitors are no better off than he is with regards to the intel reports they get. Anko turned to face Naruto, whose shivering in revulsion had subsided due to the distracting topic of ninja combat and tactics. Good. It was serving its purpose then. Hey kid, do you know that lecture I gave you long ago about how tools are the most underutilized and appreciated ninja skill? Well, here's another use for them. Tools work just as well on samurai as they do on anyone else. You can wrap them up with wire, assuming you do it so their swords don't cut it. You can poison them, use gas grenades to blind or choke them, trick them into fighting your puppets, or do anything you'd normally do to someone with a tool. Our fancy chakra tricks don't hurt them, but tools work just fine. Except for explosive tags, Kuinai reminded. The blast is chakra-based, so it doesn't hurt them. Okay, Anko admitted, leaning back and getting comfortable. Except for them, unless you get tricky with them. She grinned wickedly. Because they know they are immune to the tags, samurai often charge right into them, or ignore the explosions altogether. So, if you place a bunch of kunai in front of a tag before it goes off, that explosion drives the kunai and your target gets peppered by knives under cover of the explosion. He might be immune to the explosion, but not the kunai driven by it, and the kunai doesn't care where it got its momentum from. Hana scowled. Sounds simple, but that sort of trap is difficult to arrange. Getting the aim right so you don't shred everything in range is the hard part. And missing on a trap like that when you're depending on it is no fun at all. Tenten scowled. Now you're making it sound like it's the samurai that don't stand any chance. There came a moment of silence before Kuinai sighed, drooping her head. That's not the impression we meant to give at all. Anko, who was frowning, was also nodding along with Kuinai's denial. If you know all of the tricks it can turn out differently, but most ninja, if they fight against most samurai, will result in the ninja being killed. It's the ways we're taught to fight. Hana agreed, waving an idle gesture. Think of most of the clans you know of. Who are the big heavy hitters in Konoha right now? The Hyuga top the list at the moment. So say an average Hyuga fights a samurai. The Hyuga turns his eyes on, big deal, the samurai wasn't hiding and doesn't use any illusions. So no advantage. Next the Hyuga uses his clan's gentle fist on him, but the expressed chakra necessary to block up the samurai's chakra coils gets stopped and absorbed by his armor, so it doesn't do any damage. Then the samurai swings. Say this Hyuga knows their heavenly spin defense. He uses it, except the chakra emitted from all over his body is met by a sword that was created for the purpose of cutting through chakra barriers and does it all the time. End result, dead Hyuga. take a step back and say it was an Uchiha Kyuin. I added an example of her own to help illustrate the point. Against other ninja an Uchiha is lethal, but think of what happens against a samurai. The Sharingan uses chakra sight to predict movements and copy techniques, only the samurai uses all internal chakra, which all by itself puts a damper on things. We've all used it. With a Sharingan, expressed chakra is easy to see. It's like watching a pro gambler try to cheat on a deal when you can see the faces on all of his cards. A child can do it. But turn that around, so all you can see are the backs of his deck, and it becomes much harder. Now that takes real work and effort. It doesn't come automatically anymore, and most people are too lazy to learn how to do it the hard way. But even if they did, those little clues that are there that would otherwise be visible to the copy wheel eye aren't there because of the armor getting in the way, absorbing all of the chakra it can reach in order to express its own chakra shield. They've tried this before and no member of the Uchiha clan has ever been able to use their bloodline against a samurai successfully. There's just too few cues to notice in the first place, and shielded too well from the interference generated by the dual functions of the armor. So an Uchiha can't predict or copy from him, and the illusions that I might cast are once again useless on a samurai, who can stare him right in the eye and fear nothing. End result, dead Uchiha Hana concluded for her friend. They grow to rely so much on that bloodline of theirs that, deprived of it, you'll find their other skills have all rotted. But even if they hadn't, once you've closed to combat range with a samurai, even jutsu flinging range, he's faster than you are and will charge and charge and charge until he's closed to sword range. Getting away once you've joined combat is not as simple as you'd think. Body flicker doesn't take you nearly far enough to escape, unless you're an expert at it. And if he gets close enough it won't work at all. Nothing will, as his armor will absorb all the chakra you try to use, which is an ugly surprise to find in the middle of a deadly combat. Even forewarned, most ninja just aren't prepared to fight against a samurai, and don't survive their initial encounter. The Inuzuka heiress then sighed. Even Kiba, one of the best young ninja of our village and someone I'd put up against most members of any other hidden village, look how he'd do up against a samurai. Right off he'd start with beast mimicry for a boost of extra speed and power. But the moment he got close and really needed it, it would desert him, sucked down to fuel the chakra shield of the samurai's armor. Then, if he survived that initial brush, he'd use something like piercing fang, leaping headfirst toward his foe and launching into a spin that would normally rip an opponent to shreds. But the moment he got within range, the chakra that makes him a powerful drill able to shred men or walls with ease just goes away and all he ends up with is a clumsy headbutt on an armored enemy, not a way to win a fight. All of these are very powerful ninja. Anko emphasized. Up against another ninja they'd do very well. Against a samurai, poorly. The strategies that work very well on other ninja are the wrong way to approach fighting against a samurai. Tenten, as she was before the resets, was a regrettably feeble ninja compared to most in the Chunin exam, yet she'd do better than most of them. Her strategy of standing off at range and peppering a target with thrown weapons is actually not a bad way to fight a samurai. Not the best. It won't work until he runs out of chakra and his shield collapses, but it won't get you killed the same way rushing into close combat would. And the fact that she'd not be wasting her chakra on high-power assault jutsu means she saves what she has for body flicker and replacement technique escapes, transformations to hide from him, and clones to draw him off. So she might actually survive a fight long enough to wear him down. Hana was nodding. What it boils down to is that the brute force approach adopted by most ninja lately simply doesn't work against our feudal lords. Samurai are too well protected from most of our techniques, and too good at their own specialty, to beat head-on in face-to-face combat. If you want to beat one, you've got to be tricky. There's no other way of doing it. Shitsune giggled. The silly thing is, most monks are retired samurai. So if it came down to it, most monks could beat most samurai because they already know the others' tricks. But monks don't have the fancy armor or weapons that make them so deadly to us. So it comes out as a game of rock, paper, scissors. Ninja beats monk, monk beats samurai, and samurai beats ninja. Again, it's not true all of the time, but in 90% of the cases it is. Anko leaned back against the wall of the bath and sighed as the heat from the water went to work on her muscles. But as they all report to the daimyo, if any one faction gets out of line, the ruler of that country has another resource that can beat it. Hana finished. Tsunade cackled. She couldn't help it. She'd just had the most excellent and evil plan ever. As Kazekage, leader of Suna, the village hidden in the sands, she had a whole slew of powerful ninja under her command. And Shitsune had just reminded her of all those debts that had been pursuing her over the years. Well, Suna was not a rich village. She'd never pay those gambling debts off if she lived there. There was just no way. The entire village didn't make enough money to do that. She'd end up forced at some point to part with her family necklace in order to pay off those loan sharks. However, Kitsune clan had a fair amount of money. Not enough to pay off the kind of debts her gambling had brought into being, but Naruto had become so excellently skilled a craftsman that there was little that he couldn't make, and most of what he did others would pay a small fortune for. And now some of the others in the clan were following in those footsteps. Even taking on his wives as apprentices and farming out work to clones, it would be an unusual burden trying to pay off Tsunade's debts. They were magnificent in an oddly surreal and pathetic way. But most of the clan didn't feel like being enslaved to the prospect of work till you drop for a few years in order to pay for Tsunade's drunken binges and gambling losses. On the other hand, Tsunade was now Kazekage, with a whole village full of ninja under her command. Recently reminded of her debts, and nothing to distract her from dealing with the problem, she had come up with her most excellent and evil plan. She assigned a few A-rank missions to Sand Ninja to go out there and erase those debts, either by destroying the paperwork, or silencing the loan sharks and crime lords that held them, or both. It was elegant, simple, and perfect. It got Suna a little richer by having those missions. Some of their better ninja got a chance not only to earn good pay but to go out into the world and use their skills in a practical environment, gaining valuable experience. Loan sharks kept stables of missing ninja as bodyguards, but nothing that could stop large teams of Chunin, and the sand teams could collect the bounties on those missing ninja at the same time as neutralizing the crime lords. Better still, the cost of those few A-rank missions was low enough compared to the real debts, that Clan Kitsune would happily cover them for her. She didn't even have to use the village's operation budget. Tsunade tilted the Kazekage hat to the back of her head and laughed. Now if only there was some sake around this place. Sigh. Oh yeah. No drinking in hidden sand. It wastes water and has a stigma because of that. Groan. The kid would probably try to use this chance to get her to quit. He'd been quietly disapproving of her drunken binges for years. And Shitsune, the traitor, would certainly help him. Tsunade was partly through planning missions for secret sake smuggling when the idea came across that maybe this power was going to her head. Nah. The Mantis clan were something amazing. Even more amazing to the Kitsune clan was how readily the people of Mantis accepted them. Tenten, aka Orange Blossom, aka Mikanohana, Mikan for short, considered them as family, and amazingly enough, that was good enough for the mantis. To Tenten this was an entirely new experience. She'd never had her opinion pull that kind of weight before. Ninja clans were engaged in a constant series of tests and deceptions against each other. Trust was one of those things they could least afford to share freely, and was their most heavily guarded commodity, bar none. Most ninja gradually grew to trust fewer and fewer people until they were paranoid wrecks who couldn't trust anyone at all, and those who reached that state burned out rather quickly. One of the many hazards of the profession. But, while there were hints of an underlying caution, truly, she'd be more upset if there wasn't. The mantis as a whole were perfectly willing to roll out the fine china and treat her Kitsune clan family as visiting relations. All on her say-so. It was frankly a little terrifying to poor Tenten to have anyone trust her opinion that much. But it gave her a whole different perspective on what she meant to her birth family, and the Mantis clan generally. The girl couldn't make up her mind whether to be a sobbing wreck crying tears of joy or a nervous one trying to deserve their high opinions of her. She needn't have worried. Her experience during these resets had given her a skill set that was frankly astounding. She'd already been quite a remarkable thrown weapons mistress, and in some ways it was to be expected for her to be a little rusty on all of the Suna and Mantis clan stuff. She had been an undercover agent for half her life, now. And when she'd gone quiet there were unavoidable rumors of her going native, as so many others had done before her. That was just part of the costs of doing business in the intelligence department. But her family had truly mourned her passing as she'd gotten lost. Now they had her back, they were every bit as enthusiastic as though she'd been returned from the dead. They were even holding an extravagant party in her honor. Now, Tenten had had a few parties before, but they were all small-scale affairs, namely what an orphan with only a few friends could afford. The scale of the shindig the mantis was holding, on the other hand, was the sort associated with what clans passed for a ninja village's royalty. Of course, she'd been to these before, even had a few thrown in her honor, but that was all back before she'd turned 7 and gotten assigned to deep cover as a way to punish her father for objecting to trying to kill Gaara. Not the sort of stuff that sticks in your memory strongly literally half a lifetime later, when everything associated with it had already been forgotten. But it was glorious as she experienced it now. In truth, it was not so new to her even so. One of Naruto's frequent parties would, in many ways, surpass even this. That boy had a positive flair for entertaining that never grew tiring. But she knew Naruto loved her, knew it with that same soul-deep certainty that a person knows they exist. It was a priceless treasure, and yet, it made her feel a whole different kind of love to see and feel and hear others expressing that to her also. The best diamond in the world is not diminished by also having the best sapphire. She could be loved by Naruto and her birth family now. There simply was no better state of existence she could imagine. Naruto had been aware from his earliest days of learning craft skills that he did not, even after obsessive experimentation, know it all. There were clans of masters who'd carefully cultivated their art over generations, and after centuries had discovered secrets they shared with no one. The boy from Konoha did not have access to all of the environments or materials, so could not play with everything. Nor could he think of everything by himself. His imagination, great as it was, still had limits that could not encompass every lucky break or discovery made by thousands of minds across generations. Mantis was one of those clans of masters that had been smiths for a very long time, and had an interest in learning the smithing secrets and techniques of others. Also, being ninja, they had some ability to steal those techniques for their own use, and more than sufficient reason to do so, as it made their own armaments that much more effective, thus enabled them to live longer. As a direct result, they were among the best smithing clans of Hidden Sand, which was itself a country famous for its blacksmiths, and being a military village, their best weapons or armor was something they'd never export. Mantis tools and arms were simply extraordinary. Few could equal them. Most clans, even most villages, didn't even come close. And that was a big part of why they were more than slightly interesting in the Kitsune clan's armor and weapons, specifically the techniques with which they'd made them. Naruto had by sheer blunt force of incessant practice and experimentation discovered things they did not know. And they had a lot to share in return. There came a delicate, even discreet, offer of potential negotiations, seeing as how they were now all family through Tenten. This was, of necessity, a very genteel sort of probe, as no one shares their best secrets casually, and the clans didn't know each other. Their only link was through Tenten, and to expect a tentative ally like that one to start gushing secrets was unheard of. Well, unheard of to those who don't know Naruto. What? The boy exclaimed, once the Mantis representative, Tenten's mom, actually, had finally gotten out a hint blunt enough for him to catch. You want to know how I make this stuff? He rapped his breastplate with a silver gauntleted finger. His bluntness over such a gentle probe horrified the woman. I'm so very sorry. I didn't mean. Well, sure. The blonde bounced, bubbling as he took her hand and started to drag her in the general direction of where he half thought he remembered their smithies were. Come on, let me show you. Do you need to change out of those party clothes first? The poor woman's jaw was hanging free at the moment. Fortunately the clan head, her husband, came up and rescued her, taking his wife's side and confronting the boy's declaration with a bluntness to match his own. You mean you'd share the Kitsune smithing techniques as easily as that? He clarified because that statement was unbelievable to the man. They'd fought wars over lesser smithing techniques than these. Naruto stared at the man like he'd grown a third head, before narrowing his eyes. Easy? No. But I'd die for Tenten, Urmikon Armikan, do you mind if I just keep calling her Tenten? That's the name I've always known her by. It's the name we married under. The girl's father indicated his assent. No, that's all right. She's worn that name for half her life now. I can see her becoming attached to it. I can make it an official middle name for her, if you like. Thanks, Naruto posed, pointing a finger at the older gentleman from Sand. Now, as for techniques. She is my wife. So I am your son. We are family. And family helps each other. I'll teach you everything I know. And we'll naturally do the same, Tenten's mother promised, bowing her head to hide her crying, touched this child loved her daughter so well. The girl's father swallowed. That boy had just made a pledge of allegiance that was impossible to ignore. According to him, they were not two clans related by a single marriage, they were one clan. It was impossible to get any closer than he'd declared they already were. And, seeing as he'd brought their missing Mikonohana back to them and promised them a wealth of new information and techniques besides. The clan head of Mantis reached out and carefully drew Naruto into a hug. Welcome home, son. Naruto's childhood was a complete failure in any way you look at it. Everyone involved failed. The fourth didn't leave him any money or protection, didn't set him up with a new family, did not order anyone to take care of him, etc. He could have just as easily been slipped into a devastated family as declared an orphan. In fact, It would have hidden him much better to be just another Inuzuka, or whatever, than to have an unexplained past people might pry into. Then the third thought it to be real great idea let the S-ranked secret of his being the container out to a bunch of civilians. Even if they didn't hate the boy, wouldn't it make just as many enemies worldwide if it was known he was a potential super weapon, demon container as it would if known he was the fourth son? Nothing about that choice made any sense. Then we had the fact Naruto was already under assassination attempts by his own village. How could revealing his father hurt him more? If anything, it'd be safer to have your enemies try and kill you than your own guards that are trusted to protect the boy making the attempts on his life. If Naruto hadn't had the gift of regeneration, he wouldn't have lived to the age of 4. Dying before 2 was far more likely, as one civilian or another slipped poison into his bottle of milk. No, you'd have to be a real moron to try and raise a kid that way. There wasn't much that could have been done worse to make his situation more unbearable. Wild animals could literally have raised him better. For him to have turned out anywhere near normal was nothing less than a miracle. So it was that when the mantis accepted him, well, the poor boy was no longer the attention-starved mess he had once been. Nor was he the skill-less loser no one had once bothered to train in anything. But it was also very different from his previous experiences to be accepted and loved by anything even vaguely resembling parents. Even the older women who'd accepted him had generally done so under the aegis of snuggle bunnies than stern go-do-your-chores maternal types, and it was a different equation. Even the den mother slot was different, as the one holding it never had any illusions as to who was actually in charge. Tenten's mom and dad were good parents. They cared about doing a good job, were good people generally, and had succeeded in raising a whole flock of well-adjusted kids in the messed-up environment of Suna, and in spite of them having the messed-up job of being ninja. Only the Inuzuka clan had treated him with anywhere near the same level of kindness, and even then they'd had to overcome their own prejudices and barriers to do so. There had also been some of that pack-oriented feeling coloring things. So, as the boy was very much an alpha, there was little in the way of kindly looking after, guiding or instructing. He was an alpha. Here, with the mantis, he was simply their son. And if he needed to be told to go wash behind his ears, he got told to go wash behind his ears. And, yes, you may have fought S-class missing ninja to a standstill, but you still need to finish your vegetables if you are to grow up healthy and strong. All of Kite soon began to breathe a sigh of relief as the Mantis clan stepped in and started doing what no one else had, providing good parental role models and a spot of stability in Naruto's life. Suddenly he was awash in aunts and uncles, cousins and younger siblings inherited from having stepped in with Tenten to fill her former place. And the situation could not be doing anything better for either one of the family-starved young ninja. It was like water to both of them, suddenly quenching an old thirst. At the same time, Kite-Soon clan, or their clones, were getting ready for going on their first water runs. Naruto had learned, several times, that often the small lessons taught as much as the larger ones. Sometimes more. Water runs might not have been a great challenge to their combat abilities, nor were they strangers to other countries, but Tamrai was right in that they taught desert navigation better than anything else. And, well, they'd be working in a desert for a while. It was good to know how to travel and survive out in one. Besides, they really expected it to add a level of polish to those Suna chakra control exercises they'd all been learning. Kankuro was even enjoying himself as he took the team lead position for the trip. You know how we've been bragging about our typical ninja's chakra control in Suna? Well, here is one example. On a typical water run we must cross dozens of miles of desert holding up not one but two different chakra control techniques. We've got up sunstride to move fast, but you've also got to maintain sunblock or you'll fry. Lose hold on either one and that stops or slows us down. Oh, and if a storm crops up you'll get to maintain not two, but four different chakra techniques as we use sun sight and stormwalker techniques also. So you ready? Let's go. Naruto had, through the use of stealth and guile, taught himself martial arts equal to the best ninja academy students, placing himself firmly among the top rookie genin for skill. He'd even been forced to teach himself to top genin level twice, as the acquisition of his bloodline had thrown all of his memorized patterns for those body skills completely out of whack. Then he'd been held back by only having his mind know those moves, but having later copied those skills into reflex memories using a stolen Sharingan, he'd doubled his ability at using them. That put him squarely where a rookie Chunin ought to be. And while that was good, it had not been enough for the ambitious lad. So he'd implemented his plan for disguising himself as Sasuke to get some of the better combat teachers of Konoha to train him further. That had capped out at about mid-Chunin level of martial arts. The reason why the new limit was simple: his body conditioning, with the exception of unreal stamina, was at the level of an average academy student despite the boost in physical abilities he got through his bloodline, and couldn't keep up with the demands placed on it for operating at the higher levels. Naruto had even practiced and trained for a few weeks during the wait between the second and final exam, getting himself in better physical shape before approaching those special teachers. And, while it had helped, it couldn't lift him further than he was now. He'd played that card for all it was worth. So the young lad had, once more, run into a ceiling on his martial art abilities. It didn't disturb him as much this time. For one, he'd already had to suffer through the disappointment of being blocked and cheated it once, so the limit did not seem as real or as absolute this time as it had initially. For another, his skills were now much higher, and it was easier to be at peace with them being closer to the desired range. Genin level martial arts were a weakness, whereas Chunin level ones were merely not much of a strength. Besides, the real obstacles of not having proper instruction were no longer the limiters they once were, as once more he'd studied beyond his body's ability to keep up. So, now if the resets were to end suddenly, he would not be stuck looking for teachers, and unable to use his best tricks on them for fear of being caught and no resets to pull him out of trouble. No, all he really had to do now was get himself in much better physical shape, something he'd already learned how to do under Guy, and his close combat skills would rise on their own to the top Chunin range. Top Chunin was not nearly so much of a disappointment as top rookie Genin. Many Jonin had lapsed to or not studied their martial arts beyond that level. It was an acceptable standard if they could compensate with other strengths. Most ninja were specialists, because it paid off better to be really amazingly good at one thing, so long as it could overcome your opponents, than to be mediocre in several. It was also easier to train several specialists than one generalist. That made for a powerful argument of economics. So most ninja you were likely to meet would only be good at one thing, although they'd have some supporting skills in other arts, as being too specialized made them too easy to beat, and there existed counters for every ninja ability. All of them. Martial arts was a must-have area for all ninja, even if only as a supporting skill, because a need for it was far too likely to happen under even the most carefully controlled combat situation. But it didn't have to be a strength for everyone, and as a supporting skill it could afford to lag a little behind your specialty. So there were plenty of Jonin with Chunin level martial arts. Of course, Chunin level combat skills were unacceptable to a Kij rank ninja, as that was just lagging too far behind where they ought to be. But, for a weakness, it still wasn't nearly as bad as being a rookie genin in those skills. So, while disappointing, being stuck this time didn't hurt nearly as much. And one other thing to consider was Naruto had some very good trainers in Clan Kitsune with him now. So he couldn't be entirely denied instruction, as he'd been once before. A bit of decent instruction, and some time to get his body conditioned to the proper degree of fitness, and he'd strike Jonin level on those skills easily. So it didn't even seem like a proper block, only a delay. And, while Jonin level martial arts would not be something a Kij could brag about, if he had sufficient strength in other areas it wouldn't hold him back from getting the rank either. After all, not even Kijis could perform every skill at Kij level. No one could perform that perfectly. Besides, that moniker, mid-Chunin, was a deceptive one. Naruto had eagerly sought out training in every field he could find. So he was a mid-Chunin in not one style of fighting techniques, but several. By knocking out and impersonating academy students, he'd learned the Konoha Ninja Academy style. Then, by training with Hinata and observing Neji with a stolen Sharingan, they'd followed roughly the same pattern. Hinata was good at the gentle fist, but only about top genin good. Then, by copying and practicing Neji's style they about doubled that and acquired roughly the same level of ability as doubling the academy style, Rookie Chunin. Then it was a fairly simple matter to approach her teachers as Hinata, and though they were surprised, astonished and disgusted more like, by her rapid leap in skill, they still went ahead and trained her to the level where they could, and due to those same constraints of body conditioning, that ended up at about the same level as their other martial arts style, mid-Chunin. Neji actually had more skill than that. The obsessive boy had a grudge against the main family and a need to prove himself, so that he'd driven to where he had at least top Chunin ranking in those skills, if not low Jonin. So they wouldn't be defeating him in that family's style soon. Actually, the whole family was a touch obsessive about their martial arts training, and all of them averaged a step or so above where their real rank listed them. Hayashi came close to touching Kij rank with his gentle fist skills. From that perspective, it was a little easier to see why they'd always felt Hinata was something of a disappointment. They were wrong. That girl was a shy, gentle soul, and being unwilling to hurt your family didn't make you a failure, quite the opposite really, but, well, while the Kitsune weren't willing to forgive the Hyugas for abusing the favorite blue-haired girl, they could at least see where the mistreatment had come from. It didn't make it any easier to live with, however. And each and every one of them had had to take her place using shapeshift to receive the instruction they needed to push their martial arts skills in that style from rookie to mid-Chunin. So they'd all been forced to suffer in her place. And that did not endear the Hyuga clan to most of them. Guy's strong fist style came about originally as something of an accident. When Naruto had first stolen a Sharingan and was playing around with it, he'd unintentionally copied that style from Lee when he fought Sasuke. And, to not feel like he'd betrayed the geniuses of hard work, he'd rather dutifully gone and sought out genuine instruction from the pair of them. That was probably Naruto's weakest style, as it depended so much on having developed the body to extreme levels of performance. So even though he'd done the full regime of learning what he could, and technically knew that kind of fighting to the same level of his others, it actually fought at less than that because he didn't have the muscles to back it up. Of course, with beast mimicry up, he could approach the same fighting level with that as he did with the others under beast mimicry, so the skill was there even if the strength to back it up was not. Guy and Lee could still bat him around like a racquetball, but he wasn't disappointed about that, as the duo was eager to train him up to the same level they were on once these resets were over. And Guy was easily kid rank on his fighting technique. So that was something to look forward to. Another martial art that came about almost by accident was finding those scrolls on the Uchiha clan style in Sasuke's hidden stash, and reading them back when he was trying anything he could to improve anything he could and had few enough angles to pursue he was grasping at anything. They hadn't taught him much, but they had given him a basis for understand some of what they'd later captured. Watching Itachi slaughter Sasuke for becoming a poo wielder and dragging the Uchiha name through the muck. And relentless practice, and a few repeats, one even where they replaced Sasuke in that fight, had refined that further, to where it was almost the equal of the others. Guy had been a surprising help in that department, having fought several Sharingan users back when there was a clan of them, and having learned much of their style simply because he was that good at analyzing the martial arts of his opponents. Going to Kakashi, shapeshifted as Sasuke, and asking for refinement on that style of the art had helped as well, adding what final polish they'd needed to reach parity with their other fighting styles. Far from being accidental, the Inuzuka clan art was almost thrust upon him. Being Hana's snuggle bunny, and having worked who knows how long in their family kennel, Naruto simply was not permitted to be useless at that clan's fighting art once he'd basically become one of them. Something told him the Mantis clan art would be the same. Similarly with Orochimaru's snake style. Anko knew more than the basics of it, and what she taught them had been refined by watching Orochimaru use it while using a Sharingan on him. Even Anko's skill at that art had skyrocketed. The armed fighting styles, practicing with available weapons and throwing had all followed the same general pattern as his learning the academy style did. So, while in each of those it was possible to categorize Naruto as having mid-Chunin levels of skill, calling him a mid-Chunin level martial artist was deceptive, as each of those styles focused on separate things, and were more or less useful than others, depending on circumstance. Currently lacking much in the way of sheer, brute force, the gentle fist style was presently among their most effective forms. But take a sword or spear against a gentle fist user and that put them at a disadvantage, especially if you could fight them remotely, like through a puppet. The very thing that made gentle fist a strength, its ability to disrupt chakra coils, made it a less than ideal form for facing those things without them. Strong fist was practically its polar opposite. Face those guys who used it with a puppet and they'd powder the thing. Nor did they fear weapons, and spent considerable time learning unarmed counters for them. The academy style tried to be decent at everything, neither exceptional nor suffering any serious disadvantages. And the Uchiha style tried to merely be an improvement on that, focused on trying to reach a higher level by using more advanced and difficult moves, mostly because the Uchiha hadn't had to be concerned about how long those took to train normally. The Inuzuka was a direct, straight-line style using hard attacks and blocks, while Orochimaru's snake style was again its opposite, using curving and circular motions, dodging, and only the rare straight-line attacks. One was force and power and the other deception and speed. Generally speaking, that is. They were ninja, being too predictable was a flaw that could easily get you killed. But nevertheless, they still developed a focus to each art, and an emphasis in what they used, based on their own abilities. And families generally had similar enough traits that strong parents had strong kids, and quick ones passed on the body types to have quick kids. So gradually, almost inevitably, they leaned steadily toward a family emphasis on using the best of their natural traits toward the biggest advantage. To do anything else invited failure, as everyone who opposed you tried to maximize their own strengths, and without the ability to compete you lost. The Kitsune clan style was still under development, but they had plenty of sources to draw from and no end of opportunities for practicing it. They had so much time and resources for development, in fact, that they could ignore some of the usual limitations about working only toward your strengths, as they had almost limitless ability to correct for their weaknesses. Well, everything except strength, that is. That was going to be a real limiter on their developing style until they could actually get better bodies. However, they also had Guy and his prodigy Lee helping them, and if there was anyone more focused on and interesting in perfecting fighting arts, they'd never heard of them. Those two kept adding priceless insights into the developing style, and it was looking that, with their help and the endless opportunities to test and practice and refine their art, it was going to be a devastating one. They hoped. Of course, it helped they had so many people to test it against, Sound Ninja, Sand Ninja, and of course sparring partners from Leaf. And most of those would go to any lengths to defeat them, so if there were flaws, that was the sort of treatment that would expose them as they arose. Of course, it never hurt to have more fuel available to add to the fire. Martial arts styles were condensed fighting experience, refined by practice and thorough testing. But having more people's experience to draw from was always a good thing. So, to that end, Naruto sent a number of clones to the Chunin Ninja Academy. Being a different village in a different environment and with different views and so different experiences and techniques, the Chunin Academy taught a different style than the one taught in Konoha. Better still, as Tsunade was their Kazekage, she could simply order them to teach him. He didn't have to disguise himself as anyone. Besides, this was truly an awesome opportunity to refine the clan's puppetry skills. The ability to leave shadow clones around meant that Konoha wasn't even aware they were missing the members of Clan Kite soon as they went off and discovered a new life in the village of Suna. In fact, a very familiar scene was taking place at the Kite Sun, formerly Uchiha, compound as Hayashi Hyuga led a party consisting of various bigwigs, village elders and the Hokage to go put a cursed seal on Hinata's forehead for the rather dubious crime of marrying the boy she loved more than life itself. Once upon a time they'd had to summon Gaara for his support on this. They still liked to, after all, the greater part of the clan adored Gaara. He was just too cute and manipulatable into being a cuddle bear. A few kids' games and the very sincere and heartfelt offer of friendship and you instantly had one of the most deadly dangerous demon containers in history as your happy little lapdog. And, being rather heavily influenced by the Inuzuka over the years, the clan were also very fond of dogs, lap or otherwise, and especially cute little lapdogs that could become slavering attack beasts on demand. No, his getting all protective of them was one of the most adorable things ever. So they gladly encouraged it. Staring at the hair-trigger psychopath blocking their way into the main house, and the people they were there to speak to arrayed out behind, with clones dotting every rooftop around, the ninja in Hayashi's group realized they were in the beginnings of a battle situation and stopped where they were, spreading out a touch to get fighting room. Catching the first of the Anbu escort to run for cover in a sand coffin, Gaara squashed the man like a grape, spraying his blood all over the visiting party just to make his point before he growled in low tones, "You wanted something." Seeing that dozens of Naruto clones had spread bags of sand all around the visiting party, none of the others made a rush to take cover. Hayashi Hyuga didn't care, striding boldly forward to the front of his group and declaring, "We are here for my daughter." The man's bloodline was activated. He was no fool, and was ready for combat to spring out from any direction. What he was not prepared for was for the demon brat Uzumaki to make a single, very familiar and very disturbing, hand seal and send out a massive pulse of energy that dropped his branch house escort in nothing flat. Hayashi stared at the boy who dropped the Hyuga branch house members like flies, feeling the very underpinnings of his world fail him in that moment. The brat knew how to control the caged bird seal. The Hyuga were doomed. Those controls were their best kept secret for a reason. And they'd stayed the exclusive property of the main house Hyuga since the caged bird seal got created. While every main house member knew the controls of necessity, they became useless to any who got transferred to the branch house, as those hand seals would ground out in the caged bird seal the former main house member was wearing, inflicting the death or pain intended for another on himself. Not a few former main house members committed suicide that way, unable to bear the enslavement they had endorsed being inflicted on others once it came time for them to share those chains. And no one had ever before had to fear those controls in the hands of a non-Hyuga, as not even the most bitter branch house member would teach them to anyone outside the clan, and get themselves under even more controllers, who might disagree with each other and grant conflicting demands, while the main house were as paranoid as it was possible to be about handing away control of their primary asset, the branch house Hyuga. Having the ability to control the caged bird seal in the hands of anyone but a main house member put the entire clan in sudden, terrible jeopardy. It was a crisis of epic proportions, and Hayashi's stern and stoic expression sank into horrified dismay, melting like wax into an anguished look. The man's eyes grew so round the Hokage wondered how they stayed in his face, and he let an amused thought past his mind about whether his expression would continue to melt until it dribbled off his face. For Hayashi, it was very much as though he'd been suddenly informed that his always unquestioned power had merely been a joke that had been played on him by others, and they were through pretending now. He had been head of the mighty Hyuga clan. Now, the mighty part of that had been dashed to unrecoverable bits, and it was debatable whether he could even be said to be head of his own clan. With someone else able to order his clan members about with as much force as he, it could no longer be said that he was the unquestioned ruler of his own family. He could cite law and precedent, but force was force. Whoever had it could make himself obeyed. He could go crawling to the village council and beg them to tell Uzumaki not to use that power, but it was not the same as an outsider not having it. And Hayashi was not a well-loved man, even by his own clan. Even the remaining main branch elders would look dimly on him for losing so much of their power. The Hyuga had always been powerful for two reasons. 1. They possessed a powerful bloodline and a unique fighting style that complemented each other perfectly, that made them individually significant. But the second main reason was that they were a large clan. There were quite a number of powerful bloodlines that had only one or two active members. It said great things about the Hyuga's genes that they were able to field dozens of fully trained fighters with fully activated bloodlines. The White Eyes was generous that way, showing up in every member of the clan, with no great scarcity or requirements to activate, very unlike other major lines whose gifts appeared in only a handful out of each generation, or nearly disappearing completely, like the wood techniques, or where a user had to go to great lengths in order to activate it, like the Sharingan. It was so prolific and generous, in fact, that they'd never had a shortage of users of it. That gave them more influence than one might initially think. A powerful individual was merely a powerful individual. However, having a large mass of powerful people working together transcended anything one lone ninja could do. More people could go on more missions, possess a wider range of skills, and accomplish more things. That was why ninja gathered together in villages, and the basis for the might of their whole entire clan. Having a bloodline present and usable in anyone who was born to a family member gave them a tremendous advantage over those whose gifts showed up in a more limited fashion. In fact, it was so generous the clan had long ago become fanatical about deliberately limiting its spread, lest it spread beyond those they could easily control. But the methods they used to do so were frankly brutal, and made them no friends. The Hyugas were also stupid about that in a major way, in that the method of control they used was to have a handful of clan members enslave the rest, creating bitter, seething resentment inside the family against their rule. And really, it was the clan's numbers that gave them the largest part of their ability to project force, and from that, their precious influence. From the perspective of certain Hyuga, all of them main house members, it resulted in a perfect situation to have near total control over their branch house siblings, as they did not have to fear disobedience or betrayal. They could always count on the branch house as guards or servants, because the least disobedience could be punished instantly with pain or even death. However, that control only worked so long as one hand alone held the leash. The bitter, seething resentment of the branch house didn't matter so much so long as the lid stayed on the pot, so to speak, but any crack in that wall of control could destroy the main house entirely overnight. That crack came when more than one person could give commands that had to be obeyed on pain of death. Should person A say do this and person B say, no, don't, if either one could kill you for disobeying them, you were going to die either way, so you might as well do as you pleased, like whacking person A for abusing you all of your life. Even the fact that such a quandary could exist could get the branch house thinking dangerous thoughts. Inside the main house that danger didn't exist. It had been carefully eliminated before the first seals had even been applied by forward-thinking members, who had later been astonished by having the seal applied to themselves so the secrets of its creation would not be spread. The first precaution was that all main house members theoretically had the same goals, so would not give contradictory orders in the first place. The second great precaution was the teeth behind the first, in that the clan head knew hand seals that could override the orders of any other main house member, and would quickly slap a caged bird seal on any main house member to press the issue once corrected. So conflicting orders didn't happen among them, and if they did, were quickly put a stop to. However, the clan head's override only extended so far as his chakra control could reach, and that was limited to, practically speaking, his immediate presence. And he could be caught off guard, even so. Witness the dead bodyguards laying around Hayashi's stunned feet at that very moment. Sarutobi was caught between being appalled at the circumstance or amused over the outrageous expressions flitting over the Hyuga head's face as the previously untouchable clan head had to deal with being struck a mortal blow to his authority. Most of the town elders were suffering similar distress, to varying degrees, making for a concert of dumbstruck expressions alternating with horror, disgust and fear. And, Sarutobi considered, they had great cause to fear, especially the Hyuga. Having their control method gave Naruto perfect blackmail material. Once Hinata, and who else could it be, had shown him how to control the caged bird seals that enslaved the branch house, they dared not go against him. Because, quite frankly, Naruto was a walking time bomb from that point on, from the Hyuga perspective. What can you do about a boy who can perform one-hand seal, and push out enough chakra to kill all of your clan except 4 old men and 2 tiny girls? Naruto could manage a chakra wave that could cover all of Konoha, plus a good few miles more in every direction, instantly killing, via the caged bird seal, any and all branch house members in that zone, aside from maybe the 1 or 2 that Hayashi could personally protect in that time. Kill him by surprise. That had been tried his entire life. It was nothing new to him, and indeed no attempts had succeeded yet. It's pretty hard to surprise someone who is always facing attempts on his life. On the other hand, Naruto could, in less than a second, take out all of the Hyuga's disposable fighters and more than 95% of their overall strength. Although Sarutobi didn't know this, Naruto'd even done it once or twice, just to see the look on Hayashi's face when he realized that he was head of an empty clan. 4 old geezers don't make for much of a breeding pool, and neither does one tiny girl. Hinata would naturally not be taking place in any Hyuga breeding program, since she was already taken and quite happily committed to producing Kitsune. When producing any children at all became possible, the point behind Naruto's awesome demonstration more often than not. Reducing the Hyuga from the most powerful clan in Konoha to has-been remnants of a once great family barely hanging on by their fingernails was worth quite a few laughs in the bargain. But the Hokage was aware that Naruto could, with a single hand seal, create a Hyuga massacre just slightly short of the dread Uchiha massacre, any time he wanted to. And the Hyuga had created for themselves the tool that gave him that ability to put them in that situation. They had put a chain over their own necks and now Naruto held the leash. Sarutobi smiled, realizing that they would not be putting a caged bird seal on Hinata this, or indeed any other, day. Not unless Hayashi was willing to sacrifice his entire clan, save for 4 old men and 1 tiny girl, to do it. No. The power of the Hyuga in Konoha had ended. They may not realize it, but they would be obeying the orders of the Uzumaki from now on. They didn't have a choice. Any other course left them reduced to a scattered handful of members, barely worth the name of clan. Sarutobi suppressed a grin, knowing Hayashi had now effectively enslaved himself and his clan to a boy he'd always vehemently opposed in every venue. Yes, life could deal in sweet ironies indeed sometimes. Using the skills of a thief and burglar obtained acting on a revenge trip long ago, where he had broken into the houses of those merchants who had been cheating him out of his meager orphan allowance by massively overcharging him for the worst quality goods. One of Naruto's clones slipped inside the dwelling place of one of Konoha's Anbu. Yugao had finally tracked down one of the people that had checked out one of those 5 books on chakra control from the collection of teacher resources for the Anbu classes, and he was there to collect it. And, frankly, his talents were more than adequate for that challenge. What made the Anbu different from the rest of the ninja of Konoha was not their skill level, although that was supposed to be what did it. No, they had just as many incompetents and slackers as the general population, and by and large were not all they should have been. No, the masked ninja were not the undefeatable ghosts they should have been, or were supposed to be. But they did have a resource that was intended to place them there. The Anbu classes were basically the Ninja Academy, only the next step up. There they taught the basics of pressure points, plus stealth and infiltration beyond what the Academy touched on. It was also where they gave a ninja his first instruction on the sealing arts, and instructors there demanded a much higher level of combat proficiency than the official Ninja Academy tolerated. Being through the private Anbu Academy should put all of a person's basic skills at about the level of a Chunin, once all was said and done. And, like the basic Ninja Academy, they taught everything all at once. You could not afford to overly specialize there or they would fail you from the course. One had to practice not only martial arts, sealing or illusions, but all of them at once. It was easier to train a handful of specialists than one generalist, but Anbu were supposed to be the best of the best, able to deal with any situations that came up, and to do that they had to have a broad range of skills. So they taught them basically from where the academy left off up to the next level, in all departments, plus a few new ones. Even most Jonins, once they got accepted into Anbu, learned a great deal about subjects they had never previously touched, ones that were outside of their established specialties. Thus, an Anbu Jonin was supposed to be superior to a regular service Jonin, an Anbu Chunin better than a regular service Chunin. There were no Anbu Genin, for obvious reasons. Quite a few exceptional genin did get their chance to attend Anbu classes, but if they graduated got promoted automatically. The private Anbu Academy was one of the ways around the regular Chunin exams. It was not deemed wise to let every high-ranked ninja's face be shown in open competitions between villages, and the Anbu were masked for a reason. Aside from the hunter ninja, however, most Anbu never left Konoha. They were the FBI or secret police of the village, meant as their primary mission to keep the rest of the ninja in line. So, unlike the bulk of those ninja who were going out on missions and using all their skills, Anbu generally did not face actual combat with any kind of regularity, and this blunted their skills. In fact, having been peaceful for so long, nor having any significant rebellions among their ranks, the peace inside of Konoha had been going on for a long enough time now that their Anbu had grown quite rusty over that lull. It was that fact more than any other that led to so many deaths among the villagers when the attack came. Anbu were considered to be the primary protectors, the first line of defense, and they'd grown so used to peace that their skills had gotten rusty to the point where more Anbu died than any other class of ninja during the assaults. They met the attacks, as was expected of them, but the skills expected of them had atrophied under disuse so long that they broke instantly under the assaults of the more recently honed ninja from Suna and Sound. They didn't even significantly slow those assaults down, much to their own surprise. Orochimaru had been very well aware Konoha's Anbu were out of practice. That was one of the many factors that convinced him the invasion would succeed. Troops that have been in garrison for a long time have always been prey to those with recent field experience. Peace was poison to an elite military unit. The edge doesn't stay sharp. Like muscles, you use it or you lose it. It was a universal law, like gravity. And training was hard, unpleasant, and boring, so most people eventually slack off on it given a low enough present need. A canny ruler aware of that problem would have enacted aggressive practices of hunting enemy or missing ninja, then rotated all of his Anbu through the hunter ninja branch so they could all get recent field service. But Sarutobi was not a man known for aggressive practices in anything. He saw himself as a man of peace, and peace was good for a great many things, but producing highly advanced killer instincts among veteran troops was not among them. Since he was a military, and not a civilian, leader, letting his troops get out of shape was Sarutobi's fault. New leadership has a tendency to notice such problems and shake things up a bit, clearing out cobwebs. But Sarutobi had been in command for a very long time, letting things slide into a comfortable routine, and Orochimaru was perfectly willing to take advantage of that. His force, made up in large part of recently missing ninja, among the hardest troops with the most recent experience to be found, hit the Konoha Anbu and shattered it like glass when they met. It was like a bunch of parade ground ponies getting suddenly and savagely mauled by vicious trench dogs. It was ugly, brutal, yet effective. Orochimaru had planned his invasion well. His hard-bitten, scarred troops went straight for the jugular of his opponent while Konoha's Anbu were still waking up from their peaceful, sleepy state of comforting sameness. And it wasn't until the regular service ninja began to help that the battle had swung back in Konoha's favor. Part of that was numbers beginning to tell. Konoha was larger than both Sand and Sound combined, so it could absorb some losses and still fight back hard, but it was also that the regular service Leaf Ninja had more recent field experience than most of their Anbu, and so were less caught unprepared or off guard by the assault. Although, not expecting to be caught up in an attack on their home turf, even they were surprised, and took some time getting up to proper speed. Most of the damage and casualties had come early on in that fight. Naruto had spent a lot of time studying this invasion over and over again, and those were some of the conclusions he'd come to. The guy whose apartment he was breaking into now was not exceptional among their Anbu. He was actually fairly weak for an Anbu Jonin, and would die rather messily early on, during the initial rush before even getting his guard up. But the guy had been studying, rather lazily, a few high-ranked techniques that he hadn't had the chakra control to pull off. So, he'd checked out a manual on advanced chakra control techniques from the Anbu library. No, as Naruto's clone was breaking into his apartment to reclaim that book so he could study it, he had to bitterly reflect that some of the merchants he'd stolen from had kept better care to avoid intruders. Then again, people stole from merchants. Who'd be crazy enough to try to steal from an Anbu? Well, everybody, if they knew how poorly this guy protected his place. The only problem Naruto's clone had was finding the book amidst all that stuff. Eventually he located it under a stack of magazines that had a potted plant perched on top, telling him how diligently that Jonin had been about studying that manual, and replacing the guy's shampoo with glue and his toothpaste with wasabi, along with another prank or two as a reminder not to be so careless. He fled back out of the window, one sleeping Jonin none the wiser. On top of the Ninja Academy roof Naruto ate an apple. It was really a very nice apple. He'd stolen it from the Hokage's table, and the Hokage always had the nicest food. It was golden-cheeked and delicious, an import from fruit country, he thought. Tossing the depleted core over his shoulder, the boy ninja bounced it off of Orochimaru's head just as the Chunin disguised as a grass ninja left the building, already late for one of his secret meetings, one too important to delay for a fight over having gotten beamed with an apple core. The boy seemingly paid no attention to the Chunin's discomfort, going right on reading the book he'd climbed the academy roof to get some time alone for. Naruto's chakra control had begun to shoot up again, after who knows how long a pause under the general heading of above average, barely, although perfect with seal limiters. No small part of that was due to the recently discovered book the Anbu Jonin had been using as a plant stand. It was the next step up from the 3 basic chakra control exercises taught, and almost exactly what he needed. The book talked about combos of chakra exercises, and the first examples it gave were things Naruto had already done, having figured them out on his own, such as standing on water while floating leaves over his head, standing on the sides of trees while floating leaves over all parts of his body instead of just the forehead and hands, and so on. But Naruto, in his practice, had stopped there, and that book didn't. The next step it described was to combine water walking in unusual ways he'd never thought of. The very first step was to enhance and refine his ability to water walk, a process of enhancing surface tension with chakra so the water could hold his weight, until he could create fruit-sized balls of water that did not break. Like a water balloon but without the balloon, he would simply be enhancing the surface tension yet further until it could be formed into balls. The skin would be hard enough so it held up under handling. That was a great deal harder than it sounded, and not only taught him a lot, but led to some great water fights in and out of the clan. Heck, the surface tension could be raised high enough to harden the balls until they stayed together in spite of kicking, so they could play soccer with them. Gaara loved that. It was also interesting to note, paint could be formed into water balloons the same way, and splattered most satisfactorily on impact, a fact the Uchiha could attest to, as he had Sakura's shade of pink dribbling down his scowling face during the next written exam. The next step after that was where the real payoff started. Once a ninja could form those independent balls of water he could try levitating them like he'd learned to do with leaves. This was a lot harder than it sounded, as the chakra flows to maintain the hard outer skin of a ball of water were almost impossible to sustain without touching it, at least the first couple of times, until one started to get the hang of it. In fact, it was to learn that lesson that the clan got together and played so many games of soccer or baseball using hardened water balls, of course starting out with bouncing smaller ones around like hacky sacks, as a way of keeping up frequent contact, building up to longer periods of not. However, worse still for the aspiring student, the chakra flows for floating a leaf weren't anywhere near the same flow rate or pattern as the stuff for holding a globe of water together, and getting your chakra to split up and do both things when it wants to combine into either one was hard in a way nothing Naruto had ever done before was. The only thing he could compare it to was trying to sing two different notes at the same time. Your vocal apparatus was made up to do one or the other, not both at the same time. Actually, there were monks that had learned how to sing chords, but Naruto didn't know that. Although it would have encouraged him if he did. Only the fact that he knew other ninja had done this before him kept him going, and, of course, the leaps and bounds he made in chakra control trying. Compared to the floating ball of water technique, the other exercise was lots simpler. It was to combine sticking to the side of a tree with water walking using those same balls of water the first had him develop. That meant holding a chakra-skinned water balloon to his body with more chakra, and once again it fought him, willing to do either one but not both simultaneously. The next stage after that was the tricky one, however, and that was to roll the water ball around and over his body using chakra alone, without touching it with his hands. That caused another one of those eye-crossing moments where he knew it could be done in theory, but seemed to splash himself with water every time, as each and every single attempt was more complicated than he'd imagined. He was now long accustomed to flaring chakra out of certain parts of his body, his feet, head and hands primarily, although he had practiced sitting on the sides of trees, or hanging off by his back or shoulders. He'd also floated leaves over most parts he could imagine. However, all that shared one thing in common, a fairly static location. While walking on a tree, the part you used was your feet, or hanging off it by your back. Here, the object was to move it all across your body like a slug racing from point to point, and that was harder than it sounded, as to move it from your hand to your elbow required not just that you stop emitting chakra from your hand and start it from your elbow, you had to kind of roll it all the way, going from on and off in a continual line between, and all of that without breaking the bubble that kept the water contained. It was maddening in how frustrating it was, got him wet time after time, and also was one of the most productive exercises he'd done in a long time. Naruto loved every minute of it. Hard work and him were old friends. Any amount of effort was acceptable so long as it got him results in the end. Even before the resets he'd worked feverishly hard to master anything put before him. It was not his fault he'd been sabotaged by instructors or outright denied any form of training. Previously, he'd been forced to go from low-level chakra control training, all of the way up to extremely high level, skipping out on all of the steps in between. Knowing the true purpose behind the D ranks had helped to fill in some of those blanks, but now he was really starting to fill in the mid-ranges in between, and nothing in this world was more satisfying. Well, except perhaps to see his angels grow into the most skilled and wonderful people they could be as they did this too. Actually, they'd triggered off an explosion of growth on their own. Domestic life around the Kitsune compound was getting more varied and interesting as more and more of his angels started to work on perfecting their domestic skills, doing cooking, sewing, carpentry, metalsmithing, etc. as they each started to contribute their own little touches of personality to the amazing works of art that were their home, clothes and meals. Variety was the spice of life, and the more people helping, the more ideas they had, and the more interesting everything became for all of them. Team 7 gathered outside the Forest of Death on the morning of the second stage of their Chunin test with some apprehension. It wasn't the test that was making them nervous. No, in fact Anko had begun varying it to such a great degree that it rarely bore much resemblance to itself anymore, as the old way had just gotten too boring. Today it was to be a race. One person on each team was drugged, and would play casualty, while the other two had to haul their teammate's body over some difficult terrain and down a river. Sounded simple enough, so to make things interesting they'd be hunted over the entire trip by one of the other teams, bent on capturing them. Each team took 2 trips through the forest, once as hunter, once as prey, with Anbu watching over each part of each test to keep score and ensure no one killed anyone else. After one of their previous tests where killing was not involved, Taeya had passed on how Orochimaru had ranted and raved over how he'd hated that part. So, ever since she'd discovered how much it talked his shorts not to be able to slaughter the genin contestants indiscriminately, Anko had been skipping out on the waivers and running non-lethal tests almost exclusively. Taeya took some pleasure in relaying the Snake Sunin's tantrums over this, even going so far as producing her chakra puppets and disguising them as him so she could have them reenact the better parts. That had swiftly degenerated into overacting, and now running Orochimaru parodies was one of her unique skills. Just the other day Taeya had gotten Tsunade to pee herself, she was laughing so hard over the latest Orochi parody. The Sunin had known her teammate so well, that for his personality to have been utterly captured so completely by his bodyguard's mockery was infinitely hilarious. Anko could hardly keep a straight face as she told them all the rules. In fact, at one point she couldn't, and had to run off behind a tent to laugh herself silly after having caught a confused look on a certain grass ninja's face, and been unable not to recall the parody play from the night before. Odd, the disguised Orochimaru thought of her behavior, but in his confusion he did not connect it with one of his bodyguards having nearly broken down in laughter herself earlier that day when he'd done something inconsequential, grabbing something with his tongue that he could not now recall. It had been a simple thing, but so in character that she could hardly wait to use it in her next play. She was honestly thinking of having her chakra puppets display a case of classic, well, I use my tongue for everything Orochimaru-ness by having one using it to unstop a plugged-up toilet, that same gleeful expression of his on its face all the while. A Jiraiya puppet flirting with an Orochimaru puppet in drag would also be on the agenda, Taeya decided with a smirk. And, to get material to use for the nasty expressions he'd make once he'd learned the truth, the female member of the Sound Four went off to find the Toad Sunin and get him drunk so she could have an Orochimaru puppet in drag flirt with him. Art reflects life, after all. Kin caught sight of her leaving, and Taeya gave her a suggestive waggle of her eyebrows and a glance towards the disguised Sunin that broke the other Sound Girl up laughing right in the middle of Anko's explanation, causing Anko to also catch the eyebrow waggle and run off to bust a gut chortling herself. The assembled genin shifted nervously, uncomfortable with not knowing what the joke was. Sakura lived for moments like this. She was on a team with Naruto. None of the other girls were, so during those times when they acted on missions as a team she had him all to herself and could work on him without interruption. She lived for that. During these tests they could work together, eat together, sleep near each other, and she could even imagine he was fighting for her when they got into conflicts with other ninja. She knew that was more wishful thinking and hope on her part than actuality, but that yet was worth living for. He might do it for real someday, love her as much as he did the other girls. And he couldn't really ignore her. He had to honestly protect her to some degree, as if she died on these tests then they reset, and too many resets too soon was too boring. The entire Kitsune clan liked to stretch out the in-between times as long as they could. Sakura herself didn't care much about any of that. Her world was Naruto and making him notice her, and since he never forgot when time reset, she was making progress on her goals whether the resets were long or short. Of course, everything that made this situation wonderful for Sakura was a minus as far as Naruto was concerned, who was even beginning to question why they'd brought his pink-haired teammate into the resets in the first place. Oh yeah. To see if she could become a better person. And, because of that, they couldn't turn off the experiment so long as she was making progress, which she was. Sigh. No, he had to admit that Sakura was, in every way, becoming a better person. She wasn't fighting with other girls as much, had gotten a hold on her jealousy, and was nowhere near as violent, but, the thing was, she was becoming a better person, but there was so very far to go. Shitsune had actually hit him below the belt once by comparing her overcoming her bitchiness to him overcoming his ignorance. Okay, that had been a lot hit. Accurate, but low. So Team 7 was waiting in some apprehension. Those two factors alone would have been enough, but there was also the fact that Orochimaru and his false grass team had been sidling up closer and closer, the Snake Chunin having recognized him as the boy to beam him with an apple core, when Anko arrived. Seeing as she was in test proctor mode, the special Chunin gave no sign of the familiarity she felt with anyone, either by snuggling up to Naruto's bones or attacking her old teacher. Instead, the woman who had with relentless practice become a fine actress, along with the rest of Clan Kitsune and their allied retainers, showed up giving no sign that she knew any of them at all. You, she pointed to Sasuke and the disguised Orochimaru, seemingly at random. You'll be the ones to be drugged for your teams. Then she gave them a nasty, superior smirk, playing the vindictive proctor role to the hilt. Unfortunately, we've run out of the oral version, so you'll be forced to take it rectally. 2 enema bags slapped them, one each in the chest. And since I don't care to get my hands dirty, you'll administer it to each other. Orochimaru's face split into a grin so wide it nearly bisected his face. It probably wasn't possible for anyone to grin wider, and he forgot all about his petty revenge on the apple core boy in thinking about his sudden access to Sasuke's boyish bottom. The Snake Chunin couldn't decide which made him happier, the opportunity to fondle Sasuke's ass, or having the Uchiha touch his in return. Try not to enjoy yourself too much, Sasuke. We all know you don't like girls, Sakura teased, which had the Uchiha pale dramatically and glare at her, while Naruto broke down laughing, as she'd stolen the words out of his own mouth a moment before he could speak them. Orochimaru's grin, if possible, got dramatically wider. At this point it had to have had something to do with those anatomical jutsu of his, as a grin that wide should not be possible. It clearly wasn't natural. Anko, in an amazing display of acting prowess, did not reveal one tiny hint of what she was thinking for the moment, simply shooting her thumb in the direction of the nearest tent without the slightest crack in her vindictive proctor faked. Right, you two lovebirds go off and dose each other. Try not to spend too much time enjoying it or you'll be late for the test. Casting subtlety aside, Orochimaru picked a suddenly horrified Sasuke up by his tongue and raced off into the tent indicated, all other plots forgotten for the moment. "Nu-u-u-u-u-u," came a mortified scream a moment later as his pants came flying out the tent flap, only to be drawn back in by a tongue a moment later. Anko had already joined the 2 remaining genin of Team 7 in rolling around on the grass in helpless laughter, clutching their guts as they wept tears from their eyes. The two fake grass genin stared at each other uncomprehendingly. Orochimaru was much mellower when he came out of the tent, dragging Sasuke, who looked bedraggled, humiliated, and somewhat in pain. The hickey on the side of his neck wasn't a cursed seal this time, and he had lipstick on. He got no sympathy from either of his teammates. Then the drugs kicked in. They all knew Orochimaru wouldn't be put down by anything they could concoct. His poison resistance was so strong he wouldn't even get a buzz from lakes of booze or the most powerful hallucinogens they could get. So there really wasn't much point in trying. They just gave him the ordinary stuff and made it a rule the drugged teammate couldn't get up. Of course he'd break that rule. The Snake Sanin wasn't interested in the exam, only Sasuke, and would gleefully disrupt things and break rules. But there wasn't much they could do about it without staging another small war. Not that they were reluctant, since that was how they'd discovered that a shadow clone couldn't open any of the celestial gates without popping itself. The harm inherent in so doing was enough to vanquish them. And only shadow clones would be going into the forest with him. Still, Sasuke passed out quite nicely, and Naruto and Sakura loaded him on the backs of their tigers. Both were fully armored in the clan style. Naruto was riding Simba, as usual, while Sakura had been gifted with a tiger for her own use for situations like this one. Anko had jokingly called it Tampon because it was red, often bloody, as she frequently relied on it during fights, and went between the girl's legs. Sakura had, in a surprising show of meekness, done nothing to fight that name. That had led to some guilt among the angels, so it got nicknamed Tampy. Team 7 allowed themselves to be led to their starting gate around the Forest of Death, then taken away to a small building for last-minute instructions where they were traded with shadow clones meant to look like them. For all other teams, they would be shape-shifted to the right forms. Here, they didn't need to, even Sakura had gotten that skill down by now, although the girl suffered a bit. Her chakra reserves had always been small, and all of that was mental energy. She had practically no physical to speak of. So the reset span on physical development hurt her in the chakra department more than anyone else. So she could only make one. Naruto had to shift a clone of his own to play her tiger for her, a fact she secretly enjoyed. All of the teams but Orochimaru's were switched like that. It made for a more interesting environment in which to play with the Snake Sanin's mind. The starting bell sounded and the gates sprang open, sending hundreds of clones and Orochimaru's disguised team racing into the training ground. Only to find that Naruto's clones had been busy there the previous day, and they'd built a completely accurate scale replica of the village of Hidden Sound Within, based on memories retrieved by the Yamanaka clan techniques out of Kin and Teiya's experiences there. Or, when that fell short, those two girls used the techniques themselves on Kin's teammates and the other Sound 4. Actually, since Teiya wasn't bound to the town for the exams, she could, and did, even take a few trips back to sharpen up their details. Also, having begun to read the instruction books, Naruto had begun to get a great deal of summon technology working that other ninja regarded as just junk, and there had been this one movie player, VHS it was called, among that pile of discards with a ton of movies no one else in the elemental countries had ever seen. Including this rather inspiring film called Fantasia. Orochimaru's team came screeching to a halt when they happened upon the scale model Sound Village, populated by dancing hippos and anthropomorphic crocodiles wearing feathered caps and capes, most of them modeled rather distinctly on the ninja of Sound Village. In fact, that one over there, dipping its head to straighten its glasses, was doing a classic Kabuto imitation. The look on Orochimaru's face was priceless. So much so that Teiya had to get a picture for use in that night's play. That's it guys, hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel if you want more videos like this. Also tell me in the comment section down below if you have any recommendation about what I should make next. Thanks for watching.